When I say Satan, what do you think about? The horns and the pitchfork and red? Or do you think about the cartoons as a kid with the Satan on one side and the angel on the other? Or I'm trying to hit every age demographic here. So if you're a Gen Xer, do you think of South Park? Or if you're retired, do you think about, I didn't even know this illustration, someone taught me, Flip Wilson, The Devil Made Me Do It? Or Netflix, Lucifer. So this is, for 3 weeks, our sermon series, Pushing Back the Darkness. And we're actually going to be talking about Satan, the devil, Beelzebub, whatever you want to call him, evil. But we're going to be talking about, so today, we're going to look at the scriptures, particularly in the New Testament, that teach us about who Satan is, how evil acts in the world. And then the next 2 weeks, we're going to talk about ways that Satan tries to either tempt us or teach us lies, and we're going to be looking at how to combat and tools and skills that we have as followers of Jesus. So this all came about, this sermon series, actually, God spoke last fall in October at What's Up Wednesdays. I was leading a Bible study, and we were talking one night, and some of the scriptures were what we're going to talk about today, and we actually started talking about Satan, and we're like, how many people, and we did this poll in the room of those of us, and there was like only one person in that our small group who had actually ever heard a sermon on Satan and spiritual warfare. And I'll be honest, in my 25 years of ministry, I know I can't believe I'm that old, how'd that happen so quick? In my 25 years, this is a first for me. So how many of you have actually heard, if you're unembarrassed, that you've heard a sermon on spiritual warfare or Satan? That is more than I would have thought. Okay. It's something that I think for myself, and we were talking, a few of us after the first service, like it's uncomfortable to talk about. Or if you talk about Satan, will we be one of those Christians we see on TV? And yet, evil is very real in this world. And as followers of Jesus, it's important for us to talk about spiritual warfare and how we go against the devil in this world. So normally in a sermon, I try to just take one scripture and we talk about that. Yet this topic is so unique, and we're going to do this overview, that this morning we're going to look at several different scriptures from the New Testament. And we're going to start with Ephesians chapter 6, and this is where Paul is talking about the armor of God. Now, here's my first God moment of the week. I use, and every day, I have the YouVersion Bible app on my phone. I highly recommend it. It's awesome. It's the #1 downloaded Bible app. And every day at 10 a.m., a scripture verse pops up on my phone. It's a notification that I get, and it's one way that I make sure I read the Bible every day. And so there's an app for that. And it pops. And every day this week, including today when the service started at 10 a.m., every day this week has been a different verse from Ephesians chapter 6. God moment. Now, this series was planned way back in October, and it was planned for this Sunday, and here's how God works every day this week. Ephesians chapter 6, we're going to read this morning 10 through 12. A final word, Paul writes, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on all of God's armor so that you will be able to stand firm against all strategies of the devil. For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in heavenly places. We maybe don't talk about it enough, but Paul is very clear that we are in a spiritual war against the evil powers of this unseen world. We are in a spiritual war, and it's important for us to remember that. The Bible is filled with references on how Satan acts. In the very beginning in Genesis, the serpent tempts us humans. In the end, in the very last chapters of the Bible, in Revelation, it discusses the spiritual war that will happen at the end. And so while we don't talk about it, it's important for us to remember that evil is present. And when you follow Jesus, Satan will attack. When God acts, Satan wants to tear it down. When God acts in this world, Satan assuredly wants to tear it down and wants that good to stop. So I became acutely aware of this last fall at that Bible study, because here is also how God acts. That day that we ended up talking about spiritual warfare in that Bible study, here's how my day started. I woke up to a text, and the text said, "Can you call me when you get up?" Because they know that I'm not a morning person. And so I was like, it was a parishioner, someone I value, a leader here in the church. I was like, oh dear. You know, I'm a cup half empty kind of girl, so I always go to like the worst. Oh dear, what's going on? And I called this person, and it was an answer to a years-long prayer for Aldersgate. It was a leader who God was acting in her life at the same time and called me and said, here's how God is acting. And I like goosebumps because God was acting in the world. It had been a prayer and a need, and this person said, it's me. And so my day started on a high. Like I was still laying in bed taking this call, and I was like, yes! And I got up and jumped in the shower and was like jived for the day. Then, just before What's Up Wednesday and Bible study last fall, that same day, I got a call from the council chair. Now, if the retired pastors in the room know, it's never good when the council chair calls you out of the blue. And he called because he heard something. It wasn't a big deal at all. It was a very minor thing. He was just giving me a heads up. But here's what happened. I started my day on this huge high. God was working, and a years-long prayer had been answered for Aldersgate. And then at the end of the day, before I'm to go to Bible study, you know, and be Jesus-y and all, I get this call, and it was like a tiny little pinprick in my balloon. And I just went like this. And it was such a minor phone call compared to the first phone call of the day, but I allowed that evil into my life to like physically be deflated. And then here's how God acts as well. because we went to that Bible study, and I had prepared something else, and it was about something else, but some of the scriptures from that night were these scriptures, and we ended up talking about spiritual warfare. And what I learned that night, I'm still growing like each and every one of you. What I learned that night was, Satan wanted that power back. I started the day on a God high with Aldersgate, and Satan wanted to tear that down. And normally I would have let that one little phone call with such a minor thing bother me for like 3 days. I would have stewed on it. I would have been like, oh man, But I got to Bible study that night, and the group, and we identified. And it's become helpful for me to name it. That is evil. Satan, you will have no power here. And that now helps me when I get to those moments, because when God is at work, evil wants to tear it down. So you know that my only hobby is I watch TV. It's not a very good hobby, I know that. I stream. And somehow I like crime and police dramas. So in January, I stumbled upon Saving Grace. It's like a 2008 TNT show, and I never watched it at the time, but it popped up on my Hulu feed, and I clicked on it. And the whole show is about this crazy cop, Grace, and how God is acting, and she has her own personal angel. And about halfway through the series, God does this huge miracle for her. Huge. And it makes the news, and her angel says to her, now it's going to get really tough. And it was another awakening for me. When God is acting, and it becomes so obvious in the world, Satan wants to tear it down. Evil wants to win. But that's not our story. And so our second scripture this morning comes from 1 Peter chapter 5, and we're going to read 6 through 9. Humble yourselves under the mighty power of God, and at the right time he will lift you up with honor. Give all your worries and cares to God, for he cares about you. Stay alert. Watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Stand firm against him and be strong in your faith. Remember that your family of believers all over the world is going through the same kind of suffering you are. So we start with verse 6, because Peter is writing, humble yourselves under the mighty power of God, and at the right time, he will lift you up in honor. God wins. Evil wants to tear down the good in this world, but we know, and we just celebrated last weekend, that God wins. The tomb was empty. Death couldn't keep him. He rose again and gives us everything. God wins. And so it's helpful to remember that if and when you notice that Satan is attacking, God's got this. God wins. And then, so our scripture, it says, humble yourselves under the mighty power of God. Now that's the New Living Translation, which we read on here on Sunday mornings. The original, closer to the original translation, would be the mighty hand of God. That's closer to the Greek translation, that we are in the mighty hand of God. Now, one of the only other times this description of God's power is used, the mighty hand of God, is when God protected the people at the Passover and they were under the mighty hand of God. When God led them out of slavery, it was the mighty hand of God that led them. When they wandered in the wilderness, it was the mighty hand of God that protected and fed them. And when they moved into the promised land, it was with the mighty hand of God. And so that was a once and done event. But now, because of what we celebrated last weekend on Easter, we are now always under the mighty hand of God. And we are protected. And to this day, God's mighty hand is still upon us. Even while suffering, while experiencing tragedy, while undergoing spiritual warfare, the mighty hand of God protects us. And 1 Peter teaches us how to go out into the world protected. Because of the mighty hand of God, Peter writes in verse 8, "Stay alert. Watch out for the great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour." Stay alert. Other translations, keep awake. Our job is to be aware. I could combat that second phone call when I finally realized this is how evil wants to tear me down. And you, Satan, do not have that power. So we are called to keep awake. Now that's hard, and that takes discipline. And remember last week on that Thursday night, Jesus asked his disciples to keep awake and pray. And remember what they did? They fell asleep. We get comfortable. We fall asleep, we get complacent, and Peter is telling us this morning to protect ourselves in war, keep awake, stay alert. And then I love how the scripture puts it. The imagery in this verse is so powerful. Watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. I mean, imagine that. That is Satan lurking in the weeds, hiding and waiting to pounce upon us. He prowls around like a roaring lion. The King James translates it, stay alerts. And King James puts it, to get to the whole meaning behind the Greek, be sober, be vigilant for the devil, or also be disciplined. Have self-control. And other translations even say, be focused. And that's who we are to be in the world, staying focused, because when the devil wants to tear us down, he will use anger and hatred. He fosters resentment and the desire for vengeance. And to go into battle, we need to be disciplined. Now, I'm kind of a history buff and a war buff, and we talked about it in our archaeology study about the Battle of Thermopylae. Now this is where 300 Spartans, you may have seen the movie The 300, 300 Spartans stood against the entire Persian army. Well, now they say it was more like 7,000, but 300, it tells a better story. But so they stood against in this one pass, and they were so disciplined and focused that it eventually led to the downfall of the Persian Empire. We're in that strong a battle. Satan wants to throw everything at us, and we have to stay focused and disciplined and be that vigilant to combat it. Because the devil prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. I just love that imagery because it helps us be aware. And then it's also helpful to remember, sometimes we're called sheep. We're part of the flock. Jesus, the good shepherd. We're called to go after the one that runs away of the sheep. Lions love to eat sheep. And that's how evil acts in this world, prowling around us sheep of Jesus Christ, wanting to pounce and devour. In the coming weeks, in the next 2 weeks, we'll talk about some of the tricks that Satan uses, how Satan uses lies, how Satan tempts. And today, our focus is to stay focused, to remember. One of the other scriptures that is used, it's referenced if you follow along in your handout, is John 10:10. The thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. And Jesus says, my purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. Well, God moment number 2. Remember, this has pretty much been planned since October. So it's all laid out. That night at Bible study, it wrote itself. I made these notes. I kept that handout on my desk until we scheduled it all out later in January, but it was done. John 10:10 was always a part of it. The thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. And Jesus says, my purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. So God moment number 2. Every Sunday morning, I have a routine, and I allow myself to listen to my flash briefing on Alexa to see if anything happened overnight that we need to be aware of and pray over. And before I do that, though, my discipline every day, and especially on Sunday mornings, is to say, Alexa, what's my Bible verse? And it's a different app than the YouVersion Bible, so I always get 2 scriptures a day. Literally, this morning, before I got in the shower, I said, Alexa, what's my Bible verse? And she goes, she has a British accent in my house, I'm not going to do it, but it's John 10:10. And she starts to read to me, the thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy, yet God's purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. God is present in this world, and God is acting with us at Aldersgate. And when that happens, the devil is always prowling around, looking to devour. And so as you go this week, to take into our lives is to stay focused, keep alert, stay awake, and name it. Because in naming Satan, then the power of Jesus acts.